You're welcome. You become the strongest hero using a spear and end up being feared and betrayed by your best friend, so I hope you like it and don't forget to subscribe so we can reach 100,000 subscribers and get this plaque and start posting every 2 days. So let's get to the content. Then after putting on his fleece armor already starts with the talk that in that place the power of his entire family and Joshua won't be able to change anything with just his power. He even says that he will show how stupid are the actions of our Prota, and one of his friends start to notice that even though they both have the same ring, his always shines brighter, and he even considers asking his father for that ring too. But Natasha says that his father would never give something so expensive just because he wants it and she wants it. Still says that this situation is a waste because basically she is super interested in Prota, but since he is now one of Varen's targets there won't be much left, and Varen says with her personality she would get tired of him very quickly. Besides that, every time he look at Vesh he doesn't manages to stop remembering Sirius, so he tells the boy's brother that soon he will be the same way his brother is. But then our protagonist simply starts walking towards Varen and he starts to despair, saying that he already had told him not to move or he would completely destroy the boy's family. But the protagonist puts it on the table and orders it to be measured, saying that it was he who said that this place is a place where his family's power determines everything. And then the ring in his hand begins to shine and everyone notices that it's one of the rings of dawn, and they ask how the hell someone like that kid has something like that. And then Joshua says it's going to show the power he's so proud of, and an explosion of lights starts to appear and they start to get afraid of this and asking what is happening. And one of them says with that amount of light how big the core of that ring would be, and coming out of the middle of that light Joshua appears with a white cloak shining gold, and Varen starts to say that something is definitely not happening fitting, and he begins to ask how besides how Joshua is wearing armor with that pattern. He recognizes that symbol as a symbol of Duke Agnos' family, the Knight's Tomb, and some of them begin to think that it would be impossible. After all, Babel already graduated from that school, and then they remember about the rumor of that child who became a mana user at the age of 9 in Duke Agnos' family, and he comes completely nervous asking if it wasn't him who said that the power of a family determines everything in that gym. And Varen starts to get scared, so Proto reveals his real name as Joshua von Agnos, and I ask with high is his family's position in that place, and then Varen starts to shake with fear, and Natasha says that this must be a misunderstanding because they knew that the boy is from this family, they wouldn't have messed with him. But Joshua, as the good sexist oppressor, tells her to shut up because he isn't talking to her, and Joshua asks if they really think he will forgive people who think about their lives others like rubbish. This while they use the power of their families to throw someone into the depths of despair without any shred of remorse, and one of them, already quite scared, asks him to wait because they are the successors of the 12 families and he thinks he wouldn't want to have enmity with families of this caliber. But Prota answers the boy's question with another question and asks if he wants to make enmity with Duke Agnos' family, and the boy starts to think that he is already in trouble with the Pontier family, and what if he makes enmity with the family of Duke Agnos? T-Sit could put his position as successor at risk, and he still thinks to himself that the Agnos family has a completely different level compared to the Pontier family. So Joshua says that he will only go after those who touch his friends, and he will give them a chance for those who didn't get involved with them to get away from there. And then Nobra's puppies start to get scared, and several of them start to make excuses saying that they have missions and various other things to do everything they can to get out of there and not suffer the consequences. And Varen starts to threaten the boys because after betraying them they won't be safe. But while he starts talking nonsense, Prota tells him to worry about himself because today is the day that Araxia will disappear from the academy, and in this he is already starting to imbue his sword with mana and sees one of Clemencia's feet asking him to let it pass just this once. But PRA says he's sure he's already given him a chance, so he throws the boy away. He goes flying with just a swing of his sword, and after the boy bump into everything on the wall that was behind him, his transformation starts to fade and he lies there passed out, and his friends start to get a little scared of what is happening. So Josa goes to one of them and tells them to take Varen and leave, but the boy starts arguing with the protagonist saying that he heard that the successor of the Agnos family will be Babel, and no matter how much talent he has that fact won't change, and even though he's scared shitless he still acts angry, saying that one day Joshua will regret that. But Prota little does he care why he's talking and says he's looking forward to it. But Natasha calls him saying she needs to take Varum to the infirmary soon, and then his friends go to him and find this fact about the Agnos family strange. But Joshua says everyone has their own secret, like Hagar, who also has her Ikaros, in turn reveals that he is not so surprised that Joshua is from one of these families. After all, it wouldn't make sense for someone from a fallen family to be entering the academy. Besides, it also wouldn't make sense for someone from the imperial family to be interested in someone from a destroyed family. But Joshua raises the possibility that he went to the gym to find some kind of connection, but Icarus says that would be even more impossible. After all, none of the children there would come close to a child from a destroyed family. Icarus also says that if he looking carefully at the facts, you can tell that he was really hiding his identity. After all, of all the students, he was the only one from a destroyed noble family, and some nobles from important families enter the academy and are condemns his identity. So Joshua says he didn't know that, but he thinks to himself that just having the courage to say everything he thinks in front of someone with such status shows that he really has what it takes to be a top-of-the-line strategist. He still remembers of what will happen in the future, where he managed to face an army of 1 million soldiers with a force of only 10,000. Then the protagonist he starts to look at the boy in awe, and he asks why he is looking at him like that, and Prota simply says to him that he has very beautiful eyes. Once again leaving our trap completely red. And in the principality there is a king who dedicated his entire life the independence of the principality, ended up dying at the age of 72 due to a cruel fate from the heavens, and after saying goodbye to him they call the princess to continue and thus throw King Mara's body in. Then the man takes up his bow and remembers the king saying that even with so much work he is the one relaxing, and he says that he leaves his daughter and betrays this warrior, saying that now Tran's destiny is in his hands. So in the present, while he imbues his arrow in flames, he says that he will gain Tran's independence whatever the cost, and so the king's body is finally cremated, and the princess stops by his side saying that she will leave the RAV in his care as well as her father's wishes, and he in turn says that he will dedicate his life to this land. And in this he begins to think that now that the king has passed away, he will not only have to face the Swallow Empire and Avalon, he will also have to face the Magic Tower, so somehow he needs to make the primordial magma stone completely his. In another place in turn, Jack has just arriving at the Avalon Academy, and outside Castle Joshua begins to prepare to leave the academy, even though he didn't think he would have to leave so soon, and he decides to go to the Imperial Palace straight away because he also needs to find something in Armin Imperial secret, and he still thinks to himself that Cain would be completely surprised to find out that he is leaving, but he knows that the boy is training very well with his father, while he thinks someone has sneakily approached our protagonist, and with that he tells Joshua that they met because he was looking for him, and our protagonist asks who he is. He says he took a while to introduce himself and says he is one of the members of the 7 wizards of the Magic Tower, the seat of Thunderjack Stirrups, and he says he came to retrieve the Bronto that he caught it in the forest of black beings, and the guy still has the nerve to say that he will kill his life if he obediently hands over the Bronto, and Joshua looks at him seriously and says that this is not the place for them to deal with this matter and tells them to retreat to a more suitable place, and the sorcerer ends up agreeing and follows Joshua to a specific place. So he starts asking how long they will walk as they have already moved far away, and Joshua even agrees with him, and Prota says that he was very naive following this way because if it's one-on-one he certainly has the confidence to beat the sorcerer, but when he hits the man he can hold off the attack with just his hand, saying that he's probably the strongest of his generation, but he throws Joshua in the ground saying he's not part of the boy's generation, and he starts saying that since he's not going to hand it over obediently he's going to start breaking an arm, but Joshua says he's talking too much and he's going to end up losing if he keeps getting distracted so much, so he calls Lucia, and spear hits Jack knee side and throws him away, but through his lightning magic he manages to undo his body, transforming it into electric currents and recreating itself in another place, and then he starts to think that this could have been dangerous because that spear is the ancestral artifact that he heard about, and then he starts to question if that lightning that he used to kill the ogre came from that spear, and Joshua when taking his spear asks if he really needs to answer that while making a face badass, but it was all a pose because he is thinking that the guy is stronger than he expected, but he doesn't seem to know that Joshua has already absorbed the Bronto, so Jack says that if he doesn't want to say he has no choice and he will have to do the fashion old, but Joshua says he won't open his mouth under any circumstances and would rather die than talk, but the wizard says he's the one confusing things. After all, he's talking about mental magic brain control, so he undoes himself once again, appearing in the back of Joshua. Then he activates his blade of thunder, but the boy manages to stop her using Lucia, but is astonished that he can use a class 4 magic just by conjuring with words, and Jack to improve things tell him to stay calm as it won't kill him. After all, mental magic is more effective later to cause extreme pain, that is, he will leave the boy almost dead, but even after saying that he wouldn't kill him he throws his thunder spear at the boy, and our protagonist before being hit thinks to himself that he must be crazy, saying no go to you kill because anyone who was hit by an attack like that would die, and then the attack hits home straight away where Joshua was, and after the explosion of lightning Jack starts to think that the boy was quiet now, but he sees that the boy used a jutsu replacement. Then he appears behind Jack, but the attack he launches doesn't cause any emotion in Jack, and he asks him to do something cool, but when he was crowing a lot he tries to hit Joshua, and the boy manages to dodge his attack using his spear, and while he does this he thinks he needs to maintain the level of tension, he needs to stay calm and make the movements as simple as possible, and when he hits Jack's arm he thinks that Joshua's mana control is very well, the boy's mana density is very high, so when he lowers his spear he raises it again, applying the lightning strike. But Jack once again uses his Logia and turns into lightning, thus running away. And when he says that Joshua has good tricks, boy says he doesn't want to hear this from a sorcerer like him, and when he tries to attack him again, this Akuma no Mi user doesn't stop transforming into lightning, escaping from the boy's reach. But while he does this, he manages to throw Joshua away with a slap, but still the boy manages to land on his feet, so Jack asks how long he will be able to dodge, and so they start tag using their powers. While the guy flies, Joshua just keeps dodging, but as he does this, the boy forces himself to think of some strategy that get face the distance between the two, and then Jack stops in front of him, saying that he heard that there is nothing more humiliating for a warrior than losing in a hand-to-hand fight against the sorcerer, so he says that he will make Joshua experience some of that humiliation, and how the boy will have nothing to wish for. He has to face it head on, and in this he activates the art of the magic spear. First forms a thunder strike, and Jack in turn activates his thunder blade, and after a huge flash and a gigantic explosion, Joshua is thrown towards back, and so it sticks Lukia on the ground. But the boy is visibly tired, he can't take much anymore, and so Jack goes to him praising the boy because even B-rank knights wouldn't look good after being hit by a 4th class spell. But Joshua is still in one piece, being hit head on, but Jack says that he won't get through this, and so he says that this is the boy's last chance and asks him to pass the Bronto here soon, and he still has the nerve to say that he feels guilty when he needs to hurt such talented children. And then Joshua starts to see several spheres of lightning around him that he wonders when they created it, but Jack tells him that it wouldn't be good to move too much now because the moment he closes his hands these things will straight towards Joshua. But the boy asks if he thought he would give up, so Jack says there's no way, and after closing his hand all those spheres start to go towards Joshua, but he starts to spin, and then he activates the art of the magic spear, the second form, the Gale Impetuous, and this creates a gigantic whirlwind of mana in front of Jack, and he says that the boy doesn't stop surprising him with every move, and he says that he was planning to kill him in this attack, but the boy still managed to resist, and down there in a crater that was formed, the crazy man is simply in pieces and still holding luck and trying very hard to remain standing. But things are not going well because these spheres are still around him, and he starts to notice this, becoming quite scared. So then Jack says that the lightning spheres don't disappear until they annihilate the enemy, and then he asks if the boy is going to ask for a break, and so he raises his hand saying that he's already a little disappointed because it was starting to get fun, and he asks the boy to show his genius talent just once again. While Joshua is down there already completely losing hope, he starts to see that blast of magma heading towards him, and Jack continues to sing victory, asking if he is no longer so confident to receive that attack without dodge, and he says that even if he isn't, he won't hold back this time even if the boy is disintegrated, so he just tells Joshua to turn around. Then he throws the flaming rune at the boy, and he stays down there already discredited when Lukia starts talking to him and asks what he's doing and if he's already giving up, and then Josa starts to notice that time has stopped, but in reality it hasn't. He's just gotten slower, and then Lukia asks him if he's going to continue being so pathetic like that, because if he gives up now he won't even be able to use his new power. But Joshua tells her that his opponent is very strong and he can't use his power, but Lukia remembers that he never cared about that nonsense because it didn't matter what situations he faced, it didn't matter how strong was the opponent who blocked his path, he always moved forward destroying them all. And after this speech on Jutsu, Joshua remembers his old way that he used in the Rian era, and he remembers that he always survived on all battlefields. Outside that, he tore down a castle who said he was impenetrable, so it doesn't matter who the enemy is because he's still Joshua Sanders. And after Joshua reasserted himself on the battlefield, Jack was happy throwing the fireball at the boy, but Joshua began to gather mana all over his body. He then activates the art of the third magical spear called the Path of Azora, then he throws his spear through the fireball, opening a hole in it that goes directly to Jack, and realizing the danger he is in, he teleports to another place. However, the spear doesn't stop there and continues following him, and when he finally thinks he's safe, the spear appears near him along with Joshua holding onto it. Then the boy throws the spear and burns the clothes on Jack's chest, and he wonders how he managed to do this, but it was too late, and a gigantic bang occurs at the place, and when the dust settles, Joshua is standing with the spear in his hand and Jack is lying down shaking, and he realizes that Joshua is using demonic energy and divine power. But when he realizes this, he ends up dying, and Prota begins to feel the impact of such an advanced technique of this type, and after spilling some blood he realizes that he would be the one who would be dead if Jack hadn't let his guard down. But in the meantime, Lukia begins to emit several rays from Jack's body, and these same rays that are emanating from him end up hitting Joshua, and the boy threatens to faint thinking if this would be the end for him, but Luke wakes him up again and tells the boy to hurry up and cultivate his mana, because if he doesn't do this, Bronto will devour Jack. Stops mana circle and end up going crazy, and even with his consciousness almost fading, he realizes and can understand what Lukia is saying and puts into practice what the spear is saying. And then on another day, in the direction of the academy, they start with Agno's problem because his son entered entered the academy in disguise and the students want him to be brought to the public and reveal all this fraud. Duke and them too. They think that if they continue to cover up these special admissions the reputation of the academy will plummet, and so they take the discussion to the director of the academy and he thinks that this situation could end with just a complaint. However, the children from the 12 families are involved in this and it doesn't end well, and one of them starts proposing the expulsion of Josh von Agnos to serve as an example and nip special admissions in the bud. But Professor Kane says that this cannot be expelled because he could resolve this with just academic services, but the guy says that this is the problem because of these light punishments it has become so big. But Professor Kane says again that they don't even know the reason that led him to participate in special admissions, so they can't expel him like this. But the little guy says again that they have enough reasons. After all, Joshua ended up seriously injuring Baron Shinvillas and they can't cover up this situation, but Kane starts to raise suspicions that he is receiving bribe on the outside since the Marchesa will introduce him to certain influential politicians, and he asks if they all don't agree with that, but the teachers start to make an excuse. Taking a step back and seeing that everyone there is corrupt, Kane starts to ask the director because a special admission is not a reason for expulsion anywhere on the continent, and Kane also says that Josa should have been thanked for putting an end to the evil acts of the Circulo-Araxia, something that not even they, the teachers, were able to do in all these years. But the guy picks on his speech saying that he should only say things for which he can take responsibility. But Kane puts his mouth on the trombone saying that everything that happened at the academy was due to the teachers' fear, and he asks until when they will remain silent, because as long as they are teachers they won't be able to do that. So the discussion gets a little more heated, but in the middle of it someone from afar says that he agrees with the way Kane thinks. So everyone looks at who it is and Agnes is coming in. And Ari Bruce is in the room, and when the two arrive in the room Ari says that there was too much commotion for him to just ignore, and Agnos says that his son made a mistake, he will be there as his father. Makes a lot of sense. So the director asks him not to be formal, but Agnos says it makes sense for him to be formal, even more so in this meeting at a school where the future of the country is about to be formed. He also says that this is the meeting where they will decide whether or not to punish his son, but the teacher wanted punishment to begin to give back, and Ari says that admissions specials are in fact a wrong thing, and that's regardless of the reason, and he asks the teacher making a very threatening face, but the teacher doesn't support the scolding, but Agnos asks him to stop, and he says he just asked a simple question, and one of the teachers who was looking at all this and asks if Agnos went there to cover up the fact of special admission, but the director asks him to stop that as he might end up causing trouble for them. But Agnos says it's okay because it's true that the reason him being there are the problems involving Joshua, but the teacher starts to argue with him saying that since he is there, even though it is a place where they will prepare children for the future, just his presence there will strongly influence everyone's decision. Teachers, and he says he doesn't see a problem if Agnos is there, just as a father concerned about his son to take full responsibility for the boy's bad behavior. But in the case of special admissions the fault is not only with the student but the director. He asks him again not to speak so directly because he could end up leaving them in a bad situation, but the little guy ends up agreeing with what the teacher said, and he says that since Agnos is there, there's only one way for them to decide that. But Eris calls their attention because everyone kept their mouth shut when that Araxia group was disturbing their son, but now that the situation has changed and Araxia is being disturbed by Joshua, they are taking action very easily, and the only thing that all they can do is lower their heads and listen quietly. But Agnos says that everyone was confused because he didn't come there to pressure the academy for the incident that happened, and the director asks what his presence there is due to, and he says he heard that his son he said disrespectful things about the Stein family, and the reason he went to the gym was to apologize to Count Ari, and when he found out that he would also be there, he was worried that Joshua might get into trouble with that person next to him, so that's why he ran to the gym, and says that he will make it very clear to him because he has not forgiven that child, and if he does not have the ability to support what he said he will look very bad. But Agnos guarantees that he will be surprised when he sees Joshua in person, and Ari he says he's really looking forward to it, and Agnos also says that now that he's there, if the special admission is a serious problem that will affect the academy, he agrees that Joshua should be punished or even expelled. In Joshua he is left in the forest until dawn, then he gets up full of pain, and he says he never thought he would use this body to fight against him, and if he had met this guy on the battlefield he would be someone even scarier than someone from master level. But while he is thinking, he starts to feel pain again and wonders why it hurts so much, but Lucia simply tells him to stop complaining and get up soon, and she asks him how he is feeling because it looks like he has grown a lot, and Joshua only now notices that he has grown a lot. Even his hands have grown, and he links this growth to the growth of the Bronto that Lucia had spoken about. Then she confirms that although the situation is not what she expected, it seems that the growth of the other power of primordial stone, the power to devour, has been accelerated, but she reassures the boy that the growth will not lead him to become an elderly person so quickly, and she says that the Bronto's growth has a limit and only stimulates up to a certain growth where he will achieve the ideal body, like that agreement that Gon made where he got that super bad body so he could kill Patu, and and then he was completely screwed. But here there is no part about being completely screwed, and Joshua doesn't understand the situation, but Lukia sums it up saying that for 5 years the stone will help his body grow for 5 years to a perfect state, and from now on he needs to pay extra attention to balance the perfect body that the primordial stone is giving him. And Luke says he has one more thing he needs to know, so she says she is worried about Bronto devouring the power that the user loses, and she is almost sure that his growth is related to that. So he asks what is that stone that is encrusted in Lukia, and he says that it is possible to say that that is the final form of Bronto. After all, it is almost impossible for the primordial stone, the object of the gods, to be stored completely in humans, and he says that thanks to this the curse that humans have that makes them need to become master to release all his power was undone by her, and Joshua connects this to the divine and demonic power that was colliding within him. So he asks if it was Luca who took care of it for him. He starts to ask who Lukia really is, but the spear comes back with another question and asks he wouldn't regret it if he found out, but he doesn't understand the question so well, and the spear asks if he has the confidence to be able to take on the burden of hearing what the spear really is, but the boy says it's no longer a question whether he can or not listen, because if she doesn't tell him now what she is, he won't use the spear anymore, because he can't go out using a strange magical object with unknown objectives, because he knows that with great powers comes an equivalent price. But the spear counters, saying which is exactly what a human who returns kindness with enmity would say to her, and she says that if he is so curious he can say, she shouts out loud that she is the greatest existence of all, the supreme being Lukia, and this while exhaling a very large amount of magic, making Joseph feel hesitant. But right after this demonstration of greatness, the boy who knew it was better to have thrown it away, and the spear starts asking him to wait, and she says that whether he is going to use it or not is no longer so important until, because the contract between them has already been established, and Joshua asks what that contract is, but she says that the boy knows it well, because if he hadn't agreed willingly the contract could not have been established. But Joshua is already wondering when it was he signed the contract willingly with her, but the spear says that he actually made a contract, because at the moment he returned to the past the contract between them was established, and in this, gentlemen, the situation becomes very, very tense indeed. And when discussing with Argaret, Amaru states that if he continues with the same position he is having, the circle will persecute Joshua even though he is from the Agnos family. He tells Argaret to act in favor of Joshua. After all, the boy revealed his own identity just to save him, and listening to all this, Argaret states that Amaru doesn't know anything because his brother was heavily bullied at the academy, and this made him feel very powerless. After all, he is faced with absolute power that he can't do anything to combat. Amaru reveals that he is jealous him since childhood, and says that his older brother was a boy like other families, but because Amaru showed a lot of talent, his brother always kept him under control for the succession of titles. And as for Agar's brother, he was the complete opposite, because Symes showed all his love for Agar just because they were brothers, and the reason that made him leave the academy after being treated like that was because he didn't want it to spread. Said Amaru, saying that he is jealous of Agaret because he has a brother worthy of pride, therefore now it's his turn to be careful with his actions so as not to end up dishonoring his friend Joshua. And Maru states that he is willing to help Agaret with this, and then the boy tightens his grip and runs out of there, saying that he had an excellent idea of what to do, while that Ari was surprised by Agnos. After all, he didn't show the problem in the fact that they could expel Joshua from the gym, so he asks Agnos what he intends to do if they really expel his son. So Agnos explains that in addition to the gym he can also go to the Order of Imperial Knights. After all, he received an imperial decree for this, and when changing the subject, Agnos comments that his friend should leave for the Swallow Empire, and now Agnos he will do some things, and he will leave immediately. Sweating, he explains that he is only delaying the trip because he needed to go to the gym. After all, a certain boy disrespected the Stein family's swordsmanship. However, he guarantees that he will leave things alone for now because many important things are happening in Trum now, and this Agnos says that Sul took quick action on this, and then Ar explains that upon discovering the death of the king of Tran Swollen with Otsman, they advanced to Tran with an army of more than 200,000 men. However, they ended up getting the worst of it to the point where Otsman suffered serious injuries, and hearing this, Agnos is left without understanding anything. After all, Tran's army is made up of only 50,000 soldiers, and besides they don't have soldiers stronger than Otsman. About that he wonders about what happened, and his friend explains that only one man was able to rise to the rank of master in Tron in this case. He is talking about Eurus, the knight of prominence. Meanwhile, Joshua tries to awaken Lukia as he fell asleep while he was talking about being a armament of the demon god, which in this case is a being that is at the top of all the demon kings, and that is why he is called god by them. And in addition, the demon god is considered the strongest in terms of combat ability, and this makes it equivalent or even stronger than a dragon lord, in that Joshua understands the reason for all his strength. After all, this could only be the work of a god, and suddenly he is surprised by several students, including his roommates, in that Agaret tells Joshua no, will flee further, and like Icarus he states that everyone there came together with the same goal in mind. But hearing all this, Joshua is confused confused, so Auguret explains that they came together to oppose the school's punishment of Joshua, in which case they will present a petition that strongly opposes his punishment, and as Araxia doesn't have that many numbers they will certainly win this petition. And upon understanding better what is happening, Josa is surprised that they have come together because of him, and upon noticing that the boy is getting moved, his friends make fun of him, but Zikuro is willing to dry his Joshua's tears. I'm feeling something strange there. Oh, this has the smell and appearance of brotherhood. Meanwhile, being Jiden goes to the director's office upset about being against Joshua's stay at the academy, because even though the boy has been from the Agnos family for 3 children from the 12 families there too, and then he reminds the director that they would receive very high positions if they took care of this matter. And when talking about Vilas and Crowell's support, the director asks why Kobol is helping them with this. The teacher comments on the war for commercial rights that occurred between the Kobol and Pontier families, and it also says about the recent union of the mercenary king of the Kobol family. Therefore the chances of Vittoria are on their side now, and because of this Count Pontier directly sent the Lady Sherry to the Agnos property precisely to ask for their help in this. He tells the director again that they must leave the Agnos family under control, who he states that he can take care of everything alone if the director is insecure about this. And during the conversation they are informed about the Hundertsoff students who came together to protest and listen to this. Zay Jordan understands that these students are fighting against the evil called Joshuao. However, the protest informant explains that the Koas are quite the opposite. In this case the students are demanding punishment from the Araxia Academic Circle. In the middle of the protest, everyone asks for the Araxia Circle to be closed, that the Araxia Circle will end one way or another, and furthermore he states that Surgeon will not be able to escape the responsibilities that involve this matter. But upon hearing this, Surgeon imposes himself and continues with his idea of keeping the Araxia standing. So Kane explains that thanks to Araxia the future of a student was destroyed, and this only happened because they were always treating the circle in a frivolous way. Therefore he claims that this must change from now on, but Surgeon says that he has no proofs to validate his accusation. But Kane claims to be a witness to what happened because he knew everything that was happening to Simos, whose future was stolen by Araxia, and in addition he also knew about the leaders who mistreated him. After all, Simios came to ask him for help, and in the middle of the discussion Joshua guarantees that he will take responsibility for the special admission. However, the boy states that he will clean up all the dirt in the academy before leaving. Gug says that Joshua will be treated like dirt by Agnos Nos if he is expelled from there. Therefore he tells him to be more careful so as not to tarnish his family's honor. But Joshua says that the matter has nothing to do with the name Agnes, as his real objective is to make everyone there take responsibility for their actions. So Gug starts to tremble, but he tries to impose himself by saying that his family and his friends won't let him do anything like that, and tells the director he says that Professor Kane is correct because the Araxia Circle should never have been created in that sacred place of teaching. And although they took a while to take no attitude, the director states that he will bring everything into compliance now. That's it. Surgeon tells the director that he could end up losing his position if he continues with this idea, but the director states that this is not important as he prefers to act correctly in the position he has. But when he hears this, Gug says that the director is wrong because the important thing is the position that the person has. After all, Joshua himself is stronger than Babel, but he still continues in the position of an illegitimate son, and that means he has no right to become a successor of the Agnos Duchy. And hearing this, Agnos goes to them and is leaving this matter of succession aside for now, but he explains that to reach the top of the Agnos family you just need to have power, and as the Gug himself recognizes Joshua's power, he already understands what message. With that said, Agnos says that this matter of the children must be resolved by themselves. So Stein goes to Gug and advises him not to act in a way to cause problems for his family, and before leaving he also tells the boy to keep his distance from Amaru. It is after seeing that Stein got it reaching an agreement with Gug he calls Joshua so they can talk too. Meanwhile, in the capital of the Gondar Empire he informs the emperor about Otsman's injuries and not being so serious physically because he ended up being destroyed psychologically. So Varen decides to go and console him personally, but Albert states that his soul he's nothing more than a defeated general, so he doesn't deserve much less than consolation. And hearing this, everyone in the room agrees with Albert and suggests that the emperor be more punitive to avoid more shameful defeats like this one that killed him. In this, Albert explains that they had the advantage because their general challenged the enemy general to a duel where they had a numerical advantage, but still the general Alma lost the battle, completely destroying the morale of his own soldiers. Said this, everyone around them they cry out for Varen to apply the punishment due to Duke Otsman, but the emperor states that Duke Otsman is not the only one to blame for this defeat. After all, the enemies had a much stronger master than Alam in their favor. Therefore Varam states that they only lost because they did not have more accurate information about the enemy, and that is why he feels that the best thing to do is to prepare an action plan. In this, Albert suggests that they see 2 masters and even more soldiers into battle, but upon hearing this, Gander states that this strategy is invalid. After all, the entire continent began to observe them more closely after he failed in his surprise attack, and so he suggests suggests just carrying out surveillance, waiting for the best time to act. And what about the plot? Gondar informs that they are doing as much as they can to prevent other nations from allying with them, and to do so they are using them as an example of a country that broke the first peace treaty. And during the conversation a subordinate runs into the room and informs that the Principality of Tram announced its next king to the entire continent, and when they heard this everyone was astonished. After all, Tran is a vassal country to theirs, and that's why they should have warned him that they would do something like that. So Varen asks who will be next king. He informs that Urals will be the knight of prominence who will soon marry the daughter of the former king. So Joshua explains to his father, who received a royal decree from the emperor, and although he wanted to continue at the academy, Joshua understands that he cannot do anything to stop the emperor's wishes, and upon confirming the boy's intentions Agnos decides to leave. Stein asks to speak to the boy, and Joshua recognizes him as a proud knight of Avalon, and upon noticing the calmness of the boy in front of him, Stein is surprised, but Joshua states that they would see each other again. Anyway, sometime on this Ari gets straight to the point and asks if the boy really considers Rapires to be rubbish, and Josa thinks a little but says he doesn't think that, but he remains convinced that there is no weapon that can overcome the spear, and here that the two are surprised. But after this outrage Ar states that he is very bold to say that in front of him, so Joshua feels a very strong bloodlust coming from him. But still Joshua states that he has the necessary ability to dispel any bloodlust that falls on his shoulders, and then using his ability the boy starts walking towards Ar, who by the way is very impressed. After all, the boy is only 10 years old, so he remembers that Joshua is called the greatest user of mana, not for nothing. So Ar believes that the boy can give rise to a very tasty fruit if he reaches his peak, and he says this, unfortunately, acting like Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. Arrest this guy. In this he decides to end the boy's life with his own hands and wonders how the boy will act. Find yourself close to death, but Agnosh stops fighting at the same moment and tells Joshua that he will allow him to leave the academy. After all, that's what the boy wants, but he asks Joshua to reach at least the 3rd Battalion if he really wants to join the Order of the Imperial Knights. But upon hearing this, he wonders why his father wants to see him in this battalion, but he keeps his questions to himself and is only willing to follow his father's wishes. Meanwhile in the Agnes Duchy, Vanessa calls for her son Babel, so Chiffon asks if she is bothered by something, and she states that her son was summoned to the Imperial Palace of all places, and in addition she also comments on the sudden summons to the palace, and for her these two things completely escaped her expectations. So Vanessa states that all of this is only happening because of Joshua. Chiffon is willing to go to the arcade too, but upon hearing this she becomes furious and asks if he is really thinking of acting without Agnos's permission, and Chiffon explains that if they don't do anything, her plans will be ruined and he will end up killed by Duke himself. Therefore, he believes that the best thing to do is to go to the arcade, because at most he will be punished. But Vanessa explains that the palace is a dangerous place and that's why he can end up dying anyway, but Chiffon remembers that he was a member of the Order of Imperial Knights in the past. Therefore, he says that she doesn't need to worry. Furthermore, he guarantees that he would do anything for her, even if it could cost her life. Hearing this she asks him to return home safely. He in turn promises to follow this order in detail. Here in this scene he is basically giving a kiss, very suspicious, on the hand of this snake. I'm thinking that Agnes is a cuckold. Meanwhile Josa continues training the stick blows, and during training he remembers his interaction with Ari and notices that he is more lunatic than he expected. After all, he was able to make him feel chills in a different way, and what his father's motivation is to send him to achieve at least the 3rd Joshua Battalion. He deduces that it is because the members of this battalion are appointed as nobles by the emperor himself. Therefore Joshua believes that his father is trying to tell him to go after a new title and leave the Agnos Duchy behind. After all, this duchy will already have Babel as successor. Then Joshua must try to set up his own family. While thinking about these things, the boy is interrupted by a mysterious presence, and he points the stick in the direction of that presence and asks the person to identify themselves, but when he notices that they are not there, no one appears. Joshua deduces that all this was just a figment of his imagination, but as soon as he says this the person in question appears and is surprised by the boy, as he had no idea he would be discovered once again. And as he gets closer Joshua Anna says it is about Zero. In this he says he would have been in trouble if Joshua had hit him square in the face with that stick, and after simply shooting before asking, he asks what Zero is doing there, and the guy says that a problem has arisen, that he would already have to look for him because of his request. Then Joshua asks what kind of problem it is, and Zero says he's going to leave card for a while, so it will delay the information he asked for a little, and besides he's the only one who can get information about the god of war Draxia Vel Grace, who asked him, and Proto assumes that the reason for him leaving is the Principality Trun, and Zero is surprised by how much the boy knows, but Joshua says that the delay he will have is actually good. After all, he needed more time to find the coin red, because even though he said that in 3 years he would get, he received an imperial decree from the emperor himself to enter the Order of the Knights, and so he will have to move. Zero is surprised by this, saying that it looks like he will have more things to do. He says it is okay to give him more time to find the red coin after all his organization is working frantically on this, so they don't have time to worry about Joshua. And returning to the first subject, he says it's time to tell the new information that the boy asked for, but after making a suspenseful little show he reveals that they discovered that Drax Belle Grace has some kind of relationship with the Avalon Imperial family, but the boy is completely static. After all, he already knew that, and nothing is surprised when he finds out about Belle Grace's relationship with the Emperor of Avalon, Marcos. But I think this is suspicious because Marcos was not the one who had a relationship with him, but rather the fourth Prince Kaiser Britain. And then he starts to find something strange and asks Zero if the Lunar Door really thinks this information is true, and Zero says that they believe that she has a high level of credibility. He assumes that this is because of the relationship between Draxia Belle Grace's parents and the imperial family of the Swallow Empire, and then something clicks in Joss' head and says that he already knew the Emperor Marcos is trying to interfere in the Swallow Empire, and he supposes that Marcos is trying to take the current emperor from Swallow Varen, that Belle Grace, and put the Draxia on the throne. And talking a little about Draxia, he is the god of war, unbeatable, a man whose abilities almost rival that of one master. And speaking of which, Ari is elsewhere talking about the nephew of the current emperor of Swallen Verona, Belle Grace, and he wonders why the hell he needs to do something so irritating for a single family. And then the soldiers who were close to him tell him to be silent because he can't go around insulting Emperor Verona, so they say that what he did is unforgivable, but AR doesn't care and says that blood will probably need to be spilled, but since it's their blood he doesn't care so much. And in that, Ari starts to defeat one by one until the soldiers form the shield formation. Then they activate the mana shield, and when activating this technique, a mana shield formed by all of them surrounds the group, and Ari only manages to hit one of the shields, and he admits that they are using a technique very interesting, but he proposes to show an interesting technique too and asks them to wait anxiously for it. But when he was going to say the name of the technique, someone tells him that it's cool to enjoy the fight, but they don't have that much time, and he realizes that then the other man finally arrived and he attacks the shield, breaking it easily, and this man is Duke Trembling, so he activates his diving move and simply ends up with everyone raising a huge dust, and Aereo starts to complain saying that the dust is bad for the respiratory system, but then soon starts praising Duke Trembling because he is always surprised by his sharp movements, and even though he has aged he is still in his prime. But the guy doesn't care. He simply asks Ari why he doesn't take it more seriously, and he says they are on a border, but it doesn't change the fact that they are in enemy territory, and he asks if Ari isn't being too sloppy, but he continues with a completely unassuming attitude, asking why he is so worried because it's not like they have to infiltrate the Swollen Palace and bring back the Emperor's head, and he states that the work they need to do won't even require mana. But Trembling yells at him saying that gentlemen always need to do their best, and Ari thinks as if this old man is too boring because he has nothing interesting besides his skills, and he claims that Duke Agnos is much more fun, and he says that now he is even more fun, especially when he thinks about Joshua and that time when he almost left. The boy feels the despair. Bro, this guy is starting to show up. Hisoka, I'm starting to get scared. So Trembling starts asking why he talked about Draxia of Grace, and also asks if he forgot that the Emperor told him to be careful with what he speaks, and he says he only said it because he doesn't like the situation he's in, and he also says he doesn't understand what the Empire has to lose if they don't play according to that Draxia's games. That's it. But Trembling says that it doesn't matter if they are deceived or not, he just needs to follow His Majesty's orders. But when Trembling continues talking, Ari simply cuts him off saying that everything is fine because what could go wrong with him being sent by a kid who just wants to be Emperor of Swollen, and in that he simply tells them to go quickly because as he said they are out of time. So Trembling starts to say that he sympathizes with Evergrande's words when he said to keep an eye on Air because you never know where he could run away. And going back to the academy, Joshua thinks to himself that he would just disenroll, but he ends up asking Ikaros if he is serious, and the boy says yes, he wants to become his servant, and asks Joshua to take him with him, and Joshua asks if he knows what, which means, although the boy's origins are peasant, it is unquestionable that he is a nobleman now, and even so he asks if the boy will want to become a servant, and the boy does not deny it, saying that if he goes to the Imperial Palace he wants to go with him, and Joshua starts to think out loud that it would be beautiful to see his growth up close, and then Icarus gets all red. Look, the orange juice route is becoming more and more canonical, so Joshua asks Icarus to be honest, and asks which one is real boy's goal when become his servant, and he says he wants to prove his own worth. While standing next to Joshua he doesn't understand anything, but Icaros asks if he hadn't asked him to become his servant before. Icaros says that leaving his family aside he believes that Joshua will grow to a point where he will surpass the Agnos name, and he says he needs to prove his own abilities to stand next to someone like that, and he says when he has approved those abilities he expects Joshua to use him in the most appropriate way based on his decision. He thinks to himself that Ikaros is an exceptional boy and there is nothing better than them getting together, but he smiles at Ikaros and says he refuses, but then the boy starts to ask why, and because Joshua thinks he would be of no use as a servant he starts to say that even so Joshua has nothing to lose because he's not talking about getting a reward, and like he said before, he just wants to prove himself, but Joshua says the opposite because the boy is so incredible that it would be a waste for him to stay with him, and Joshua says if he really wants to prove his worth he must stay at that academy that Joshua abandoned, and if he wants he can even use his family's name, and instead of becoming his servant he must stay at that academy that even though it is corrupt it still has vast knowledge that can be learned, so this will be better for the boy. And Joshua, placing his hand on his shoulder, says that he doesn't want his comrades to see his servants, and hearing the word comrade Ikaros gives a slight smile and says that he understands his young lord, saying, who will prove his worth in that academy? If this isn't a trap, I'm Santa Claus. Then in another place in a flower field, and Heron Belle Grace calls her father to look at the flowers that have bloomed beautifully, but as he says this he shows a somewhat awkward expression, worried, and she asks if he is thinking about Uncle Demero again, and he assumes that he was thinking about him and thinks that if he had granted the throne to his brother Demero maybe the people of Swollen would have been happier with that, and besides that he feels that probably the relationship between Swallow and Tran would also improve, but her daughter says that even with her superficial understanding, if her uncle had succeeded to the throne the people of Swallow would be suffering much more than now. She says she remembers the smile of the people when she left the palace for the first time with her father. Then after praising him some more she says that he is the son of the empire and a father who makes her very proud and will continue to be even better, and then she asks him not to punish himself because neither does she, and not even the people want it, seeing him like this, but even so he says he can't help but think about his brother at moments like this. If I look at the sky he sees two birds and remembers about the time when the Swollen Empire and the Principality of Tran were close, and he says he hopes that no more blood will be spilled on this land. But in the middle of all this, a servant comes to him and gives him information and says that the Principality of Tran invaded the Bakia property and executed approximately 1,000 of its border guards, which obviously leaves both in shock and residents of the first wizard of the Imperial Palace. He touches a crystal ball and asks if the master of the magic tower called him, and when the master says that it has been a while, Evergrande asks if anything happened, but the master says that besides the lack of hands work since he left out of nowhere there was no other problem, and the only thing that Evergrande can do for his disappearance is to apologize, but he says that he didn't call him to talk about it, and he asks if the emperor is treating him well, and Evergrande says that is very satisfied, and the master says that this is great because although he accepted the emperor's proposal because of his ambitions there is not much he can do, even more so on the orders of the Emperor of Avalon, who is basically a dictator. So he starts talking about him being supporting the fourth prince, but Evergrande I keep asking if he asked him to give a lesson, but the master goes straight to the point, saying that he believes he made the wrong decision because he doesn't think the fourth prince will succeed the throne, and this statement rocks Evergrande, and then master says that if he had supported the first or second prince he wouldn't have complained, and he says that it's not too late and Evergrande should rethink, but when he was going to say something he thinks to himself about the first time he saw the prince, because when he listened he felt something inexplicable. Then the master says that this conversation took a strange turn. Then he says that the real reason he called was to make a proposal, and so he reveals that the seat of the seven Magi's lightning Jack Stirrups was dead, and that makes Evergrande scared after all the lightning seat who is at least master level or higher was killed, and he doesn't believe it, and then the master says that's why he's offering him the next lightning seat. He even says that accepting this proposal if it's too much more useful for his ambitions, and it would be much better than staying next to the fourth prince who has an uncertain future, but Evergrande says that he already expected that, but he will not accept the proposal, and the master says that he already knew because by ceasing to aside his investment in the fourth prince his other objective must be important to him, and the shame of asking about what the other objective is, and then the master asks him to stop feigning ignorance because he knows about the room of imperial treasures and not that false and yes the real room that contains jade stones. Then Everg asks how he knows her, and the master says that most magicians want to confirm her existence no matter how, because that's how magicians are, they have an insatiable desire for the truth. So, but he ends by saying that it doesn't matter because his offer will always be valid and he will always have a seat ready, just get in touch. But before leaving, once again he says that he has another request to make, and he says that the last one teleportation portal from the seat of lightning went to the capital of the empire Avalon Ard. So the master asks Evergrande to investigate and find out who killed Jack, and while Eso Joshua arrives in a place he hasn't seen in a long time, so already with Duke Agnos he calls Kane up, and the boy even goes full of energy, but Agnos stops his attack with a simple branch. But Kay doesn't give up on all this humiliation and says he's not finished yet and continues to strike, but Agnos continues to stop all his attacks using that branch. But he says that the boy has some very interesting movements and he gets excited again, attacking more and more, but Agnos says that their movements are only fast. Today there is no weight at all, and while they are at it, Baron H goes to Agnos and even while continues fighting Kane he asks what happened. Then H says that the matter is about Joshua as he went to the Imperial Palace, and Agnes is surprised by this, but while he is surprised by another issue, Kane doesn't stop attacking and almost hits Kane's face Agnos, but he throws the boy away with just a wave of his hands, and Cain falls completely desolate as he is being humiliated with just the branch. And then Agnes starts saying that Joshua made all that mess and went to the imperial palace without saying anything, and then he asks Cain what he thinks of his master's actions, and Cain, already scared, asks if it's really just a training fight, but Agnes tells him not to get confused. After all, that's the request that his master made to him, so Cain starts to wonder, what kind of stupid request did his master make to this monster? And while Cain is there with his mouth open, Agnes says that if he doesn't come he will go to him, so Cain gets up and tries to do something, but Agnes says he is too slow and simply knocks him out, him hitting you in the rib. Then the boy falls asleep and stinks, and Red says he's not the right person for Agnes to vent his anger, and Agnes asks him if he really should vent it on the person who made the mess, and then he asks him to tell the members of the 12 families who were beaten badly by him, and he says that the other 2 families are not showing much reaction, but the Marchesa Villa's family seems to be sending PR an official letter of protest for what they did to the successor who ended up in that completely deteriorated way, and Head states that she would like to know Agnes's opinion on this, because the same Chan of the Marchesa family wage a territorial war against the Agnos family are casualties. He still needs to respond accordingly if they send an official letter of protest, because if he doesn't do this there is a great chance that the Villa's family will argue this subject at the Great Conference of the Nobles, and Agnos begins to think about this subject, and Head also begins to think to himself that if they were to discuss this at the Great Conference of the Nobles, the Duke would have to personally create some excuse to resolve this issue, and that would be a huge humiliation for someone who was acclaimed as one of the 9 stars. But Agnos says he simply doesn't care about it. After all, he was never a very attentive father, but he doesn't think it's right to fight with his son for making a good job, so he states that he will take care of this matter with the Marchesa family, and if Joshua has a good conscience he will be able to take care of Head alone. So after this matter, Head says he has other news about the main house, so he says that supposedly Agnos wants to see how much Babel the Empire's treasury has grown, and that's why he is coming here together with the Knight Chiffon Pie. Agnos is incredulous to know about this absurd story, and already halfway to Arcade, Chiffon starts to say to Babel, which from that point on is a safe zone that the Imperial family directly manages, and then they will soon arrive at the Imperial Palace, and the boy comments that this is the first time he has visited these lands since the Academy days, so Chiffon sends him, "Don't worry, because the Emperor just wants to see with his own eyes how much he has grown," but Chiffon refers to him as the greatest genius on the continent, and the boy doesn't think that's the case because he is down with this statement, and Chiffon visibly sees this, and he even tries to boost the boy's morale by saying that he should never forget that several of the family's vassals, including himself, will always be by Babel's side. So the boy simply gives a bitter smile and thanks him, and Chiffon, not satisfied, asks the question further. Idiot that he could think. He asks if, hypothetically speaking, Babel wasn't the son of Agnos, what would he do about it? Of his knights is going through this type of situation. He would like to give some kind of incentive, and Babel ends up buying this idea, asking if there really is someone like that in the Crimson Knights, and if there really is, it could be quite shocking. The boy even offers his help, but Chiffon says that there will be nothing in particular that he can do. Then the idiot starts to think to you that it is unbelievable that he did this, but Babel says that even if it is shocking, probably not much would change, as he would continue doing his best in his life as always to be able to generate pride both for the real father and for the one he created, and he claims that this would be the best for the growth of the person in question, and Chiffon, Big Daddy, all proud, says that the boy's answer was the most correct. I think that at this point in the championship it's already possible to say that Agnos is a cuckold, right? He cheated on her with Joshua's mother, and Babel's mother cheated on him with Chiffon, the guy who is by his side all the time, and then Chiffon says that the boy is getting more and more mature, and so they continue heading towards the palace, and meanwhile with Joshua he continues talking to that girl on the other side of the wall, and when he notices that his name is Joshua Sanders he asks her if she was surprised that he wasn't a noble and didn't have the name in the middle, but she says no, just his name is very beautiful, and then she starts talking about something she saw in a book, and there it talked about a flower that blooms only in the Trivia district on the eastern border of the continent. Sanders, although it has a much greater beauty than a blooming rose. No, there is nothing sadder than discovering the meaning of this flower, but in this Joshua calls her to stop, and she even gets scared, and he says that in fact she is the one with the tragic destiny, and then he starts to tell the past of Emperor Marcos, who has the nickname of Blood Sovereign. He created countless pools of blood before he even ascended the throne, not to mention those who opposed him. He killed cousins and even other relatives. He killed and destroyed everyone who inherited even a small amount of imperial blood, and as a result Marcos ascended to the throne. However, he no longer had any male brother who had the British Britain surname and how it came to this. The only people who could be called members of the imperial family were the few closest allied relatives, and they who had fears that the pure bloodline of the Britons would be harmed arose with a shocking special marriage, and this was later judged to be the worst decision the Avalon Empire had ever made. The tragedy of the Britons, and with this the political aim of Emperor Mark, gave birth to princess who would complete his ambitions, the pureblood princess Zerin von Britain, and for those who don't understand, most likely he married a sister to keep his blood as pure as possible, so they committed something that came in 6th place. But because of all this ambition that Marcos had, Caesarin was born blind, and the reason the emperor watched her so strongly is because she had the ability to see through those who reached the master's kingdom in the mind's eye, and Joshua begins to think that if he had to face the truth, would he have been able to do the same thing as her, and in that case Caesarin, she leans against the wall and feels that Joshua is crying and feels an enormous sadness coming from the boy, so she starts asking him to tell her how much he knows, but in the middle of their conversation one of the maids comes up to her and asks if a splinter got into her finger because she's crying, but Caesarin just doesn't say anything, and the girl says it's time for them to go to the palace, and then she notices that Joshua has left the place, and he thinks to himself that it is not time yet, they will meet again when the time comes. And then already in the palace of Emperor Marcos he is talking to the daughter of the god of war, who introduces herself as Annabelle Grace, and the emperor asks if he liked the gift he sent her at the Swallow border, and she says that he is deeply grateful for his highness's benevolence. Then the emperor comments that he has heard that the situation is not going as he would like, and Anna asks about what he is saying, so he says that the people of the mainland, there is a saying that yes, Avalon, they have Arden von Agnos, in Swallen they have Prince Lucifer, and he says that now that this boy has appeared, even the god of war will have trouble dealing with this, and he asks Anna if he has some kind of plan, but she is sincere with the emperor and says that his father is not completely sure, but the emperor doesn't like what she is saying at all. After all, he gave her certainty that the plan could go very well, and with that he begins to activate his bloodlust by making the girl kneel and begin to suffer from pain on the ground, and the emperor begins to say that before he started the plan he assured him that it would be absolutely possible, and he still says that he believed in them and showed pity, yet they dared to act like spies in the Swollen Empire. And then Anna starts to ask for forgiveness, saying that she will make sure that nothing like that happens ever again, and that satisfies the emperor. But even so he says that he will change some conditions, and he says that he will give the title of Duke in place of Marques's title that he had promised, and Anna even tries to contest it, but the emperor says that he is sure that his father, the god of war, knows better than anyone that betting money on an unpredictable game is a shortcut to ruin, and Anna thinks, I can see if he was planning to do this, he had no reason to massacre those border guards, and she comes to the conclusion that this is all just a form of entertainment for him, and she confirms firsthand that he really is a lunatic addicted to blood and war, and Anna confirms that even though the emperor's opportunity is something unique for them, she asks if her father would really accept an offer like that. But Marcos says that soon he will be the Avalon Empire itself, and he asks who would dare stand in his way, and he says, Anna tells the god of war that he doesn't have to worry about anything because now that the plan has already become a meteor plan, it will need to be prepared, so he needs to come up with the quickest solution possible, and she can do nothing more than simply comply with the orders from him. Then in another place, two of the mages from the tower are looking for something, and they conclude that that land is completely different from the normal surroundings, and then his colleague says that this is not land, it is more like ashes. He asks his friend to stop jokes, but he says he's not joking, he just closes his eyes and feels the winds collide, so he does that and realizes that there is a mana void there, and he says that there are only two situations where the mana void phenomenon can occur, because either was it created supernaturally at the beginning of time, or else a magus of class 6 or higher received enough damage to their heart to die, then a gigantic explosion within a radius of 1 kilometer happens and a void is established in the place. Then they think that if it really is that, what lightning seat Jack Starup's last destination was the arcade, and his friend deduces that there is a high possibility that he was killed by someone who owns the Bronto, and now he already has his answer if it is enough to find the culprit if he follows a trail of the Bronto. And coming back to the palace, if the Caesarine is incredulous because he definitely knew everything, and then she asks her assistant if she has ever heard of the name Joshua Sanders, and she says that she has heard the name Joshua before. The Caesarini asks where was what she heard, and she says that some knights were talking about because there is a new little star in the empire, and it seems that his name is Joshua, and if the Caesarine confirms with her because the genes with exceptional talent of the empire are called little stars, and Helen confirms he is the same type of people as the young Lord Babel von Agnes, but she says that according to the knights, most of the nobles are not very excited about this because with two little stars coming from the same family that has the greatest chance of become one of the 9 stars in the future, the nobles are extremely suspicious of them. If Zirine starts starts to distrust this Joshua, and Helen says that it really is because his full name is Joshua von Agnes and he is the second son of the pride of the empire Arden von Agnos, and the girl's reaction is even a little impressive. She simply says wow. Then with the knights, Joshua has just arrived in their squad. He immediately states that the place hasn't changed at all because inside there is a fight going on worth money, and they are cheering as if they were at a cockfight, and the two knights fighting, they are taking it very seriously, even fighting with their Iran, and one of them starts to disdain the other, asking if that's really all he has, and says that's why he is treated like a mercenary. But Langer responds to Cad saying that he talks too much for someone who is from the 12th Battalion, but Cad states that the people above them came from the 11th and 12th 2nd Battalion in the same way, and then he tells him to stop acting like he was from a superior battalion. However, Lur says that Your Majesty has a very deep reason for dividing them into battalions like that, and he asks if he wants to go against the Emperor. So with this last attack he ends up winning the battle by throwing another one away. He even starts to ask if now Cads understands the difference in strength of the battalions, and people in the audience start to say that they believed in him because they would die of shame if they had lost to the only inferior battalion, and then they have a bag of coins for him, saying that that's his part because they won a lot of money because of today, and one of them warns him that that loser will challenge him again if he leaves him alive, and then he remembers to make the signing to play in paradise, but the other soon puts his head on the ground saying he's sorry and will live like a servant if he ever challenges him again, and then he starts asking for forgiveness, and Langer ends up accepting, and in that case everyone in his battalion starts making fun of the guy, saying he's embarrassing the 12th Battalion and asking what its name is. Knight doing this, and in the middle of all this commotion someone says that this hasn't changed either, and when they look it's simply a child talking, and Joshua says that this place still looks like a type of Colosseum because nothing has changed, and he starts saying that he really missed it and is happy to see this place again, but they don't understand what the boy is talking about and ask if he is lost, and then Joshua starts saying that it will be direct, and then he starts infusing mana into his dawn ring, and then he transforms, putting on his armor, and says that he came to sign up for the bloody battle of Bircha, and everyone is amazed because that is a tomb with a sword and with the coat of arms of the Agnos family. They say that only a direct member of the lineage would have magical armor of that type, so he introduces himself as Joshua von Agnes and says that anyone who wants to fight with him can come, and everyone starts to recognize the boy as the new star of Avalon and also as a kid C-rank knight who can use mana at the age of 10, and while he starts to drool the kid's egg, they end up asking if he really understands what he just said, and they also ask if he completely understands the conditions of the bloody battle of Bircha. Then Josa starts to explain the whole progress where someone can challenge one of the knights for their position, and if the knight loses he is removed from his position as Imperial Knight, and he further says that all accidents that may occur during the process are the responsibility of only those involved, and the result must be recognized, and revenge is strictly prohibited. In addition to that, any infraction will be considered an act of treason, and Lur asks if even though he knows all this he still wants to continue with it, and Josa is fed up saying that he came to sign up for the bloody battle of Bircha by order of the Emperor, and he says that's why the 11th and 12th Battalion should obey, but even so they say he could end up getting hurt because they end up not controlling their force properly. They are even more worried because it's not a question of winning or losing who would want to touch Arden von Agno's son, one of the 9 stars, because they would be branded as enemies of the family, and Langer starts to think that he is not paid for this, and this had to happen right when the battalion commander is away. He starts to think that he would have to go, but he ends up looking back and having an idea looking at the guy he just beat, but the guy starts making an excuse saying that his organs are hurting from the fight with Langer, and so he ends up running out options, and Joshua begins to gets pissed and asks if they call themselves knights with that. Then he says it will give them motivation, and he starts saying that the worst battalions never change, and it's actually a hilarious sight to behold, and he says that everything they do is to fight against each other like a bunch of mercenaries with no skills or support, and he says that they keep whining because of their regretful origins and don't even have the courage or confidence to defeat the knights from the superior battalions. And to finish, the boy says that they are just some nobodies who don't do anything because they're too scared, and they keep looking at each other when someone with a slightly higher level than them stops in front of them, and when the kid says they'll never get out of there because they're fucking cowards, they stay very pissed, and then the same shit who just lied, getting in pain, starts on the boy saying that he will teach him something because a boy who is lucky to be born in a good family can't say anything about them, and so he ends up accepting Joshua's challenge to the bloody battle, and the boy says that this is how it has to be, and then everyone tells him to teach the boy a lesson without worrying about being reprimanded by Duke Agnos, and and Cads ends up taking the air saying that he will show from the beginning that there are people stronger than him out there, so he embeds his sword with aura and he starts saying that there's still time for Joshua to stop because Kates is an experienced B rank knight and a C rank sister won't be able to beat that aura, but the boy says that there was a guy who said exactly that. Past, however, he says that things are not exactly like that, and when he starts to invoke his mana everyone starts to get scared saying that this is impossible because the boy is also invoking aura on his sword, and he asks while posing who said it was C rank, so everyone starts looking at the boy's equipment, a dawn ring, an artifact and aura. Then Cad starts saying that you can see that he is a shit amateur who is just borrowing his family's power and has nothing in addition to appearance, and he says that the boy should be ashamed, he could be dirtying the name of Duchess Agnos's family, and Joshua says that if he is doubting so much he should just go and test whether his aura is real or not, and he asks how it is, but Joshua he says he heard him and he's hesitating out of fear because he really believed the boy was a C rank knight. He calls him a coward and then the guy catches his breath, attacking him with everything he needs, but Reed tell him to stop and Joshua in turn it just spins the Lukia making a whirlwind of mana, and after the dust starts to settle Reed says that he is an idiot as he should only move forward after discovering his opponent's strength. He also says that clearly you can see that that is not normal mana, but when the dust settles at a time they see that someone has come in front, and Joshua says that that guy is awesome and asks if he has permission to stop a bloody fight even though he is a vice captain, and everyone around recognizes him as Viper Bison and he is in front of Cads, and Viper says that Joshua is well informed, and the boy confirms that he heard a lot about the Crimson Bison of the Imperial Knights, and the vice captain asks if in this case he is also aware of the regulations related to the bloody battle of Bara, and Joshua is in doubt, but the knight says that for the bloody battle to take place officially by at least one vice captain must be present, and then Joshua asks if he will cancel the battle after they have gone this far, but Viper says that he cannot cancel the will of the great Emperor Marcos as his will cannot be denied, so he says that in fact he will be his opponent, and everyone is amazed by this, but Cads says that he is against it because the duel is between him and Joshua, but the vice captain continues asking him to leave it alone, but he starts to if he changes. However, the captain tells him to wake up because he has something more important than pride. After all, he would have to give up his position as knight if he lost in the bloody battle of Bircha, and he asks that if that happens, who would take responsibility for his daughter? He asks if the man could bear this responsibility by returning to being a mercenary, and then he puts him against the wall asking if his pride as a knight is more important than his family, and he has no answer, so Joshua says it's incredible that he would sacrifice to protect his companion, but he says that even then those from the vice captain level upwards only lose their responsibilities if they lose, so it's not such a bad plan and he can continue living as an ordinary knight for the rest of his life. And Viper comments that the boy is talking as if he knows he can defeat him, but Joshua says that this is obvious because Viper must also have felt the difference between their skills. He soon looks at his sword almost broken in half, and Reading begins to thinking that there must be something special in the young lord's mana, and he also thinks that the boy certainly has something even greater than the blow he used earlier, and everyone in the battalion starts to say that they sacrificed for him to protect his position, but he says he can't do that as he never thought of them as his subordinates. In his eyes they are his brothers and comrades, and if he can protect his comrades with his own hands, the position of vice captain and his status as a knight will not mean nothing, and he even says that in fact he could walk even more by their side. Then Joshua says that his determination is incredible, and he remembers that he always walked by his side in the vanguard and destroyed everything that blocked their path. Outside of that he was more trustworthy than anyone and was also a superior officer that his subordinates could trust. He recognizes that one of the reasons he chose to join the Imperial Knights was because he wanted to cross the battlefield together with Viper again, and Viper asks him to keep something in mind because if he manages to defeat you and gains the position of vice captain, his skills must be recognized by the knights of the superior battalions, and he says that he will have to be recognized by the greatest order of knights who are on a completely different level than theirs, who are simply reserves, but Joshua states that even though they are reserves they were being discriminated because of their giant pride, and then Joshua starts calling lightning and says that in 5 years, with 5 years he will make the 11th and 12th battalion be called the strongest in the Avalon Empire, and right after saying this the lightning falls on the boy, so they don't believe what they are seeing because it is an aura blade. So Joshua questions that Viper will do and asks if he will join him. Then already at the castle, Babel greets the emperor and he says that he has been asking for a long time how old the boy is, and he states that he is going to be 15 years old, and Marco starts to say like his father is the greatest knight of Avalon in history, reached the level of knight rank C in the city, but Babel in turn is already almost at rank B. Marcos says he would be the first in history if he reached rank B while still in his teens, well if it weren't for Joshua, and this leaves the boy in shock, and Marcos he says that it can't be done that way because he should be Avalon's treasure forever, so he calls the assistant wizard and says that he will give him a gift, an elixir that increases his mana as he drinks it, so he orders the boy to drink it, but Babel thanks him his offer but says that such a precious gift, but Marcos doesn't let him continue the sentence and says that the Emperor of Avalon orders him to drink, and in this the boy has no other option but to drink it, and when he drinks it he already falls out, so the Emperor comes close to him saying that he must not remember since his memories have been erased, but they have met several times and he is sure that the boy has not forgotten his promise, so he says the time has come to fulfill it. He says the boy must never lose his position as successor to Joshua no matter what happens, so he asks if the boy understood his son Babel von Britten, and the boy replies, yes, father. My God, the kid wasn't the Chiffon's son. Besides not being the son of that guy, he's the result of a 6th place, because who doesn't? You know, Babel's mother is the king's sister. So it's Dio that the unknown event that involved the Imperial Palace of Avalon was once again buried in oblivion, and 5 years passed in the blink of an eye, and so at the entrance of a delegation he says to wait, not be late, and one of the men orders them to pay respect to the commander, and everyone salutes him. Baron Joshua Sanders, commander of the 11th and 12th Battalion. Joshua Sanders, commander of the 11th and 12th Battalion. And if you want, don't forget to leave that like and leave that comment to bring you more and more videos of this manhwa here on the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.